Welcome, everyone. Good morning, noon, or evening, depending on where you are joining us from. I am Dr. Bushra Anjum, and I am the host for ACM-W Celebrating Technology Leaders series. So this series is designed to demystify various career options. In each episode, we invite women leaders who have been successfully architecting their careers in computing. And today we are focusing on women in cybersecurity. And we have a wonderful panel arranged for you. A few logistical reminders. I will be facilitating the discussion for the first 45 minutes. The final 15 minutes are for you to ask any questions to our panelists. You can do so by typing them into the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen and clicking submit. And you are very welcome to write in your questions during the session and keep them coming. Also, on the bottom panel, you will find a number of social widgets, including Twitter and a few other sharing apps. We encourage you to share any nuggets that you find useful in this discussion with your social networks, as I'm sure they will find it useful as well. Thank you for spending the next hour with us here. We will make every effort to make it worth your while. So, let's start. The annual cost of cybercrime around $6 trillion annually. That's according to the cybersecurityventures.com. Meanwhile, the big names in the data breach, as the data breach victims, is just growing at an alarming pace. Facebook, LinkedIn, Target, Capital One, Department of Homeland Security, and many others. One of the biggest trends right now in the cyber attacks is ransomware. We have all been following the incident with Colonial Pipeline, which gained, of course, international attention and even prompted a few changes in the legal system in the US. It is estimated that there are about 465,000, that is 500,000 open positions in cybersecurity nationwide as of May 2021. These are the statistics from CyberSeek, which is a tech job tracking database from the US Commerce Department. So the demand is only expected to grow. So today we have a wonderful panel with us that will help us gain a better understanding of the field and the skill set required to be successful in it. We have veteran cybersecurity expert Sara Hall, which is Deputy Chief Information Security Officer and Head of Security Operations and Engineering at MassMutual. We have Dr. Zapita Ganavati, the Director of Privacy Engineering and Regulatory Compliance Lab at University of Maine. And we have Simone Wright, which is a cybersecurity researcher and graduate student at Iowa State University. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us and being part of this discussion. So initially, let's go around and just get to know a little bit more about you. So how did your unique personal background, interests, and maybe career aspirations lead to where you are today? We can start with Sara.
Yeah, thank you. And really glad to be here. So it's interesting because, I don't think I had a career aspiration specifically to get into cybersecurity. When I was younger, I was very fortunate that I have a mother who worked in technology. She had a degree in computer science, obviously at a time when there weren't a lot of women majoring in computer science. So I had not only an example of a career woman, but also a woman who worked in STEM. So it was something that I understood to be an option. But for me, I didn't really have a plan. I went to undergrad initially as an art major before I changed to information systems. Early in my career, I kind of felt like the opportunities found me versus the other way around. I wasn't necessarily set in one direction. I had a friend in college who wanted to be a news anchor. And that was the only thing she ever wanted to do. She had a very specific focus and she set herself out on that direction and pursued it passionately. And I remembered thinking, wow, I wish I knew like that what I wanted to do. But what's interesting is that, over time, as I just pursued some of the opportunities that came in front of me, I started to learn more about myself, what I was naturally good at, what I enjoyed, and where that fit in. Technology was a growing field and that there was going to be a lot of opportunity there. And it was something that that piqued my interest. But I didn't necessarily want to be sitting behind a computer and coding all day. And I think that that's one of the common misperceptions of folks who don't necessarily have an example, parents that worked in the technology field, that they think that everything in IT and cybersecurity is a technical role. And it's not. It takes every kind of skill set. And so that's some of what I came to understand over time. And I was very fortunate early in my career to work at a consulting company that gave me a lot of exposure to different types of organizations that we supported and different types of work and projects. So I got a real sampling of a variety of different things and was able to figure out, what worked for me and what didn't. So I think that's kind of, just sort of early in my career, how I started out in that direction.
Thank you for that. Safida, go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me. I kind of had the same experience as Sara, that I didn't really decided to go to cybersecurity, but growing up in Iran, I was always interested in STEM. And I was fortunate that I was part of a high school that we were focusing a lot on math and computer science. And the first woman that got the field medal in mathematics was from my high school, and she was senior. So she was one of the role model in math and computer. So after I finished my undergraduate in Iran in computer science, I moved to Canada to pursue graduate degrees, and working on healthcare data with hospitals in Canada made me much more interested to protecting the healthcare data. And some of the things that you need to do are protecting in terms of privacy and security. I always liked programming, but I also like social aspects of computer science. And I believe that security and privacy bring that social aspect, because you can do so much good for people, educating them about how to protecting their personal information, how to protect their systems from getting breached, and all of those things that are fascinating for me. And that's why I continued. I worked in the industry for a while in eHealth Ontario, and I found out that even though sometimes the technical solutions are easy, there's so much beyond just a technical solution in eHealth that you need to know more. That's why I went back and to postdoc, and I decided to become a professor and teach cybersecurity and privacy to students and educate them.
Very cool. Simone?
Yeah, so my name's Simone Wright-Hamer. I am a doctoral candidate at Iowa State University, and I fell into cyber. So my original background is software development. I was working I was doing an internship, and they had a cybersecurity breach really close to some code that I had written. While I was lucky that it wasn't my code, that was the first time in history that I'd ever considered cybersecurity my problem. Up until that point, it was somebody else's problem. My job is to make it work. Your job is to make it secure. So that led me to pursue a graduate degree in cybersecurity, which previously I was doing human and computer interaction. From there, I went down this rabbit hole and learned that cybersecurity research is really about finding unintended features and just using the protocols in ways that they weren't designed for. So I like to explain to people that my job is just to be petty logically.
Job is to be petty logically. I love that. And we'll come back and explore on that a little bit more in a few minutes. Sara, let me get back to you. Based on your career, so you are a Chief Information Security Officer, what does that role entail, and how can a fresh graduate eventually reach where you are today?
Well, I like that the job is to be petty logically. Maybe we can apply that across the board. I love it. Yeah, so being a CISO, I'm currently the deputy CISO at MassMutual, but I've been a CISO previously at two different organizations. One at the Department of Health and Human Services for the U.S. federal government, and then for a genomics startup called Human Longevity that focused on a lot of research, mostly around the human genome. So very, very different environments. And I think some of what that gave me was really a perspective too of, how different the CISO role is depending on the type of organization. I think what an organization needs can really differ depending on their objectives, the type of environment that they're in. For example, in the government, everything is very regulatory, right? There are a lot of things that need to be followed, but there's a different culture around that too. While you may be driven a little bit more from compliance, you've also got more buy-in from the IT side of the house because they know that they have to comply. Whereas when you're in a research environment, it's very much a culture of, we want to share data. What's the problem, right? And so really being able to adapt to that culture, and then coming, to MassMutual now. Yes, we're in the finance industry, but insurance, I think, is a little bit different than a bank. But, we have responsibility to protect our customers' information. And so I think that the core underlying concept of all of those is really being able to enable the business, because at the end of the day, that's what the entire security program is there to do. And that's the role of the CISO, is to set that tone with the team to make sure that the team understands that as fun as cybersecurity is, we aren't there to do cybersecurity because it's glamorous. We are there to enable the business and to protect them. And, coming from 12 years in healthcare, protecting people's lives is something that's obviously very critical, but protecting people's finances as well. And whatever it is that your business does, understanding what the business is trying to do is first and foremost, because you need to get that partnership, just like Simone was saying, working with the developers, right, to have them understand that designing secure code from the beginning will help us to actually make their code more successful, right? It's almost a quality assurance measure, right? So I think focusing on that, and you can do that at any level of the organization. So to your question about what about the folks who would like to be in a CISO role someday, I think one of the key things is to focus on the fact that you are empowered regardless of where you are in the organization, because there are more problems to solve than there are people to solve them. So if you take that mindset of, how do I solve a problem? How do I add value? How do I bring people together to look at what we're trying to accomplish and figure out to come away with a win-win? So looking at what the business is trying to do, looking at what security is trying to protect, helping to be an educator, right? Teach folks about why we need to do the things that we do in cybersecurity. So I think from a CISO perspective, a big part of it is working with the business. It's understanding and helping to broker those discussions. But like I said, it starts at every level. And if you want a path towards having a CISO role, two key things I would say are, one, the path there is being the kind of person who can help solve those problems, and not just on the security side, but also for the business side. So people see you as a solution provider. And then the other piece is also to make sure that you strike the balance between delivering what you need to in the role that you're in, but also not getting yourself trapped into what the business needs are at the expense of your own development. And I would say, just especially from a female perspective too, and it's not that men don't do this, right? But I think overwhelmingly women do this more, is that we say, oh, well, they really need me to do this. If I don't do this, who else is going to do it, right? And you make these trade-off decisions again and again, and suddenly, you know, maybe you're 5 years down the road and you haven't done the things that you wanted to do and prioritize. So you do have to focus and make sure that you are getting the exposure. And if you're looking to be a CISO, that means not just going up one particular track, right? And try to get as much exposure to all of the different areas of cybersecurity that you can. Look for an organization that will champion that and that will nurture that and give you the opportunities to try different things. And, you know, try and fail, right? That's the best way to learn. So that would be my advice.
Tons of good pointers in there. I especially loved striking the right balance between delivering what the business needs and also not getting trapped there at the expense of your own development. I think that's a golden advice. So let's start by looking back, and then we'll look forward as well. So maybe looking back at the field of cybersecurity, if you have to pick, what would you say are two most important developments in the field in the past? Let's start with Sapita.
So this is an interesting question, and I thought about it for a bit. I will start with privacy technologies because my first work is part on privacy, and I think the part that is one of the most interesting parts on anonymization techniques, especially differential privacy. It has so much demand and so much basically you can do with that. It's still a very hard and statistical and mathematical concept to implement, but implementing differential privacy actually bridges the gap that researchers want to do research and access to all kinds of data, and also at the same time protecting users' privacy. And differential privacy goes hand in hand with all kinds of security technologies. And encryption, I think that it's probably one of the most important part, because encryption is part of like every aspect of cybersecurity. All of the encryption algorithms that have been built during the years, and now we are developing new encryption algorithms for IoT devices. They have different technological bandwidth and processing and requirements. All of those, I think, are really important and core of cybersecurity. Even though there are so many practices that you need to do to protect security and privacy, but these two, I think, going hand in hand, especially when you have personal information, are the most important one, at least for my side.
Thank you for sharing that. Simone, your thoughts?
I definitely agree from a fundamental level that encryption has been one of the most important developments. It's really the foundation of cybersecurity and protecting anything today. One of the more recent developments in the field concerning 5G technology is this idea called network slicing. And it's combining multiple cybersecurity technologies together to create a unique network for whatever device or person you want. Traditionally, the model works like this, in the sense that the actual network of the internet is unsecure. Now, moving towards the 5G realm of things, what we're saying is we are going to divide up the network based on the device type and potentially based on the individual user. What that means is you could have your car, your cell phone, and all communications between your house and the endpoint of where you're going, all segmented off just for you.
That's interesting, and I would love to ask a follow-up question on this as well. Let's get back to that one. Sara?
Sure. So I'm actually going to go really high level, and then I'll give you a slightly more specific one. But I think over time, one of the evolutions that I think has been really important is just the acceptance that security is something that's important that we do need to focus on. And I actually gave a presentation a little while back where I was comparing the technology revolution to the industrial revolution. And when you look back at the Industrial Revolution, when we first started manufacturing things at scale and we created factories to create all kinds of new things, factories were not safe. They were places where people frequently lost limbs and they died. But the advancement of the technology that happened far outpaced the need or the desire to put safety practices and protocols into place. But you fast forward several hundred years to where we are now, and I don't know if you've ever toured a factory. I highly recommend it. It's really fascinating to see a factory in person, but they would never build a factory without safety clearly built in from the beginning. It is a paramount, first and foremost criteria for building a factory these days. So you use that kind of as an analogy of where we are in the technology revolution. Those advancements were very important to propel things forward, and we're still really in the early phases of that. And all of the things that you think about, kind of unintended uses, right? And all the magic that we've made happen just by creating this new platform. But that's where we are, is that we're sort of at that evolutionary point where people are just starting to realize that, that safety element, the security of it is actually important. That is something we should be designing in from the beginning. So that is a very high level philosophical piece, but I really think that is one of the important things that's starting to emerge. And the other piece, to get a little more specific too, is identity. I mean, to me, I think that is one of the core. There are a lot of important topics in cybersecurity, but to me, one of the most critical ones is identity, because it really is at the core and the crux of everything in cybersecurity. Because if we knew for sure who and what was performing every activity on every IT system, network, et cetera, we wouldn't have to do the rest of it, right? So to me, that's kind of one of the core topics and one of the areas that I really see emerging and having major advancements in recent times.
Nice. And I really appreciate the initial mindset change that you called out. I think you also said in the beginning that security is now a quality assurance measure. That's what actually ensures that the product that you are doing or the work that you are doing is going to be successful. Absolutely. A couple of follow-up questions. Sabina, one for you. You mentioned a couple of advances in privacy, and your work focuses on privacy as well. Sometimes privacy is conflated with security. People don't understand what's the difference between the two. How would you differentiate between the two fields, privacy versus security? And please tell us some of the work that you are doing in this area.
This is a very good question. And one of the analogies, like very simple one that I always start giving to my students, is that imagine that you have a house, you build a house and you make yourself private, like private place for yourself. And then you want to make it secure, you build a fence around it. And this is kind of the same. Privacy basically means that control over personal information has lots of overlaps with security requirements. For example, confidentiality. Confidentiality in security is basically making the data or any kind of document confidential and private. But this goes beyond personal information. So they have overlaps, but privacy only deals with the personal information part of the field. And there are other parts like integrity and availability. They have overlaps again with privacy. But the parts that we really look into is that who has access to what part of our data for what purposes, and how they can share these data with other third parties. And if the users have this control over and know that who has access to what, and be able to give consent, that's protecting privacy. Now, the purpose part is one of the most important parts. You collect data as a company for the purposes that you specify, and user give consent. If you want to repurpose it, you need to get consent again from the user. And that again loops back to the set the expectation for the user and give them control over their data. At the moment, I'm collaborating on a research with Google, and we are trying to not only looking at the user side, but also to help developers. And something that both Sara and Simone talked about, that security doesn't come as afterthought, and developers should think about security from the beginning. Same thing goes with privacy, that how to help developers to build the systems that they have privacy in mind from the beginning, privacy by design or security by design that we talk about. And one of the work that we are doing is that to evaluate the Android code and like when you're developing an application, and identify where you're collecting, as a developer, collecting information, and generating with some deep learning techniques a statement that explains what you're doing. And these statements can be then used as notices for the user to tell them, okay, we are, for example, collecting your location for giving you the giving you the closest restaurant. And generating these statements automated through code gives the developers some insight that if they are really, do they really need to collect that location for some purposes or not? And also then they can notify users for that. And this is one of the work that I'm collaborating with some of the Google researchers on that. And in general, most of the work that we are dealing with is to protect privacy for individuals.
Privacy engineering seems like a very interesting field. I would admit my ignorance that I wasn't aware of that until recently. So thank you for sharing that with us. A follow-up for you, Simone. So you mentioned 5G and the network slicing techniques for security. Is this something that is part of your research area? What are the kind of problems you are working at?
Yeah, so it is part of my research area. Network slicing combines a wide array of technologies together, and combine that with authentication and these new protocols for 5G, and you have network slicing. Where this gets complicated is now you have this huge, massive ecosystem that people will be dependent on and reliant upon its security. You're going to have vendor issues. Buying from companies that need to be vetted, and then how do you vet both the hardware and the software in a timely manner for individual components and the entire ecosystem, and then the authentication piece. We know for a fact that password authentication has not been the greatest thing, mainly because a lot of people will use passwords that they can remember, such as their birthday, their anniversary, things like that. So yes, it's a great technology, but at the same time, are we really adding security, or are we adding risk? And the security is about managing the risk, and this is where my research comes into play, and making sure that we're developing things as much as possible where we can automate some of the assessment and detect when an anomaly is happening. And then making sure that when these alerts come up for the people who are managing this network, that it's less likely to be a false positive or a false negative, and making sure that we're doing our due diligence before we throw this out to the rest of the world.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for explaining it in a beginner-friendly manner. I really appreciate that. So changing our focus a little bit towards the different careers in cybersecurity. Sara initially mentioned that there is a perception that it's just hardcore coding, programming, and technical related careers. So let me ask this. What are some of the most in-demand careers in the field of cybersecurity, and what skills are most needed for those careers? Let's start with Sara.
Sure. Yeah. Well, all of them. But I would say One of the areas actually is identity and access management. I mean, that is absolutely one of the high demand fields. There aren't enough cybersecurity folks who specialize in that, particularly in some of the leading edge solutions around user behavior authentication and passwordless solutions and things like that, that are kind of the future of where that field is headed. So it is a space, if you're looking for a specific discipline within cybersecurity, those folks are always in high demand. But I would say just from a general skill set, that what I said before about translating into business terms, right? The ability to listen and to be a continual learner and a continual teacher. So to be able to share the things that you know about cybersecurity, but to listen and understand the business and always have a curious mind. Those are skill sets that are going to be important across the board. One thing I would say, just, kind of in parallel with that, is it's great to be the best technical expert there is in anything, but if you aren't also listening, then that technical value isn't incredibly valuable. You need to understand how it applies. So I think those are, there's some of those, I hesitate to call them softer skills because they really, that makes them sound less important somehow, but they are very important in addition to the pure technical skills.
The skill to listen, absolutely. And I agree with you. Soft skills seems like the term doesn't do justice to the skills that we call soft skills. Savita, your thoughts?
There are, as you also mentioned at the beginning, there are so many demands for cybersecurity experts. Besides that, there are demands also for privacy engineering experts. And I would say that both of these are, any aspects of cybersecurity, if you look at, they have lots of needs. Software security is one of the most important ones. Developing software that doesn't have any loophole, any security vulnerabilities in it. That's very important. And if you're a software developer and you learn the skills related to where are the vulnerabilities, how you can create vulnerabilities when you're writing your code, and how you can write secure code. That's one of the things that you can basically have your career for the next maybe 10, 15 years set. There are so much demand on that spectrum. Besides that, privacy engineering is getting more and more attraction, especially with new regulations, GDPR from Europe, and now CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. All of those bring some needs for thinking of privacy from the beginning of software development lifecycle. And privacy engineering is a unique career that you have to have some knowledge related to privacy and personal information and privacy related regulation. Beside that, you have to be a software engineer. Learning the soft skills about privacy is also, as Sara said, is very important. And those are the skills that you can bring in when you're a software engineer and want to work as a privacy engineer in especially bigger companies like Apple, Google, Facebook. All of them have positions for privacy engineers, and even smaller companies are gradually seeing the needs for that.
Thank you for sharing that. Simone, your thoughts?
So I'm going to name 3 careers that I think are pretty needed right now. The cybersecurity analyst, a cybersecurity researcher, and a privacy engineer. The cybersecurity analyst is really the person who does the incident response whenever an alert comes up. More people are needed in that particular field, in the sense that there are a lot of organizations that they get so much data and they're so overwhelmed. Maybe creating situations where cybersecurity analysts are focused on a certain subset of data because we're overloaded with data today. And so a lot of people don't realize that if you were a statistician, you could easily pivot over into that field. Not enough statisticians, or at least people with a statistics background, doing cybersecurity analyst roles. So often very key information gets missed when trying to go through an alert and determine if it's a false positive or not. The privacy engineer is great role. And it entails a lot. However, organizations are just becoming aware of this need. There is this unfortunate thought that you can generalize a cybersecurity person, they should be able to do everything. And that's not a realistic expectation. And so you're seeing that role pop up to protect people's data now that people realize that this is a serious concern, especially if you're dealing with personal identifiable information or financial information. And then the cybersecurity researcher. A lot of people don't think of this role as being a people thing, but some people would argue that cybersecurity is a people problem. If you fix the people, you fix the problem. So from that standpoint, we need more researchers that are focused more on the behavioral characteristics of both the attacker and the potential target.
That's very interesting, the way you made the connection between statisticians to cybersecurity analysts and then behavioral scientists to researchers. I think it's really important to have that perspective, that how these different fields interact. One question that has been very popular with our audience in the past is, would you share one personal story of struggle and maybe a lesson learned in your career? Could be from workplace or school. Let's start in the reverse order. Let's start with Simone.
I'm going to say one of the biggest challenges, which was kind of like a slap in the face for me, was when I found out that most organizations are not actually going to give me the formal training in cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is a risk-based field. If an organization allows me to try something in their network, that's risk, unnecessary risk that doesn't have any business value. And they're unlikely to do that. So I would say for the first 2 years, I would just like beg all of these managers to let me do stuff, and I couldn't understand why they were saying no. And so I learned that the certifications are only going to test my vocabulary in the field. There's very few technical ones, and if there is technical ones, they usually don't really give you training. You're kind of like teaching yourself. School's going to give me the theory to make sure that I theoretically am going down the right path, that makes sense, that it's feasible. But the training is really going to come from buying my own infrastructure and doing these things at home in my own network. If I bring down my own network, it's not going to cost millions of dollars. So the biggest lesson I learned was invest in myself and teach myself with the resources available on the internet.
Invest in myself. I think that's a good advice across the board, no matter which field you are from. Savita, your thoughts?
So one of the biggest struggle is to make people understand why your career is important. And especially with like other people that are working in the same field in computer science, especially when you look at privacy more than security. Lots of people know, okay, they want to protect their credit card, they want to protect their banking information, social security number. But when it comes to privacy, lots of people will just say, okay, I don't have anything to hide. Why do I need to care about my privacy? And why even you bother to do this kind of work and to do this kind of research? You are making our life harder. Like if you're talking with some developers, why do I need to not collect all kind of information? Like I want to collect all this information. Maybe at some point I need them for some kind of research. These are like some of the biggest challenges to being able to teach people that yes, we want to do research. We think like maybe on a personal level, maybe you think there's nothing to hide, but if you look back, probably there are some stuff that you don't share with everybody, and you might not want like even some of like your parents know about some of the things. So I don't believe like people has like have nothing to hide, and how to basically discuss this with people and make them understand that why privacy is also as important as security, and why we need experts in this field is one of the struggles that I had. And learning how to find these points that they are closer to what people understand generally, to be able to get them back, get them attention back. It was like the struggle and how to overcome it. As I said, like asking them questions that if there's really anything that they think they want to share with the whole world.
That's an interesting question to answer that. Why do you want to make our lives harder? No, it's the other way around. You don't realize we're trying to make your life easier in the long term. Sara?
So I think if I were to say kind of the biggest struggle was probably what I mentioned before about striking that balance between my own development versus the needs of the organization and the role that I was in at the time. But since I already said that, I'll say another one for me was actually that shift in the adjustment to becoming a mom. So when I had my first child, really trying to figure out what my identity was now. And I think all parents, you struggle with after you survive the first few weeks. It's that who am I? I defined myself around my career more so than anything. And suddenly I was responsible for a little human. And I thought that was I don't know who gave me that job, but I didn't feel qualified for it. So I think, it's, and it was a bigger shift. And, how much time or the flexibility in my ability to, just work late if I needed to, right, suddenly was gone and out the window. So trying to think purposely about how I would, how I would adjust my schedule in order to balance those things in my life. And I think that the answer to that is different for everybody. But there were a lot of unanticipated things that I didn't really, think about until I was already there. So I would say that was a big, that was a big hurdle in my career, is figuring out how do I maintain, and I was trying initially to maintain the same kind of pace and the same kind of approach to work that I had before having kids, until I finally realized, okay, this isn't working. This is one of those places where I need to step back and go back to the drawing board and figure out, what does my new normal look like? And you start to learn, I think, to rely on other people more. And I think, particularly as women, we are bad at asking for help. And so I had to learn how to do that a little bit more. But it's definitely, that was a hurdle in my career, is that adjustment.
The adjustment of figuring out what does the new normal look like. I think that's something that perhaps we are all struggling with right now as well, with the pandemic and now the back to normal, whatever that is, phase that we will be entering soon. So that's, thank you for sharing that. For our audience, please, if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to write them in the Q&A widget, hit submit, and I will start taking them shortly. So we mentioned the different careers. Some people have an idea that they want to go into cybersecurity early on, maybe their second year in undergraduate studies, and others not so much. They might get this idea later on, maybe at graduation, maybe in their early career, they may want to have a switch. So question for all three of you. What type of free options are available to maybe graduating students or early career professionals to get involved in cybersecurity? Any courses you would recommend, blogs, organizations to follow? Now, let's start with Simone.
Ooh, I would definitely recommend, if you are already associated with a school and you have a .edu email address, go ahead and go to github.com and register to get the student developer pack. There are a lot of free resources available there for you. And Amazon gives $150 worth of AWS credits. And that will allow you to be able to create networks in the cloud so that you can create your own testing infrastructure. Google Cloud does the same thing. At the moment, I don't think there are any other cloud providers up there, but there are a ton of free resources available there for you. So go ahead, max that out. It's already free for you anyway. And some of these even come with like certifications. So Amazon, if you use your .edu email address, you can go ahead and sign up for some of their training for free for a limited time. So once you get that training, it comes with the certification. And that's something you could put on your LinkedIn and your resume to market yourself.
Most helpful. Thank you for that, Simone. Savita?
So I second what Simone said. These are all great resources. Beside that, NIST, National Institute of Standard and Technology, they have all kinds of standard and best practices they provide lots of guidelines for privacy and security, different aspects like network security, software security, even quality assurance, all of those. There's so much documentation. I believe that beside you need the documentation and also the practices, which Simone gave you the idea for how to do also the practices. Beside NIST, there are other like OWASP, for example, they talk about top 10 security vulnerabilities or top 10 privacy vulnerabilities and how to resolve those. There is also SCI Institute from Carnegie Mellon that they have secure coding practices, and they give you some guidelines for that, and you can do some practices there. And Seed Lab is another organization that they also have free resources for basically doing hands-on activities with different aspects of cybersecurity, encryption, like looking into different network vulnerabilities and doing some ethical hacking, basically with Seed Lab. They have their own environment. Those are some of the resources that you can use to get both hands-on and also some knowledge about like the background of cybersecurity.
Seed Lab and SCI Institute, most helpful. And I'll make a nice post about all these recommendations and share it on social media as well. Sara, your recommendations?
Sorry, couldn't get off mute there.
Okay.
So those are all agreed. Those are all great recommendations. I think one key thing is also building your network, right? Asking people to talk to you about security, because people will, a lot of times if you ask somebody to be a mentor to you, they'll eagerly agree. If you even just go on Meetup and look for different groups, I know where I live, there are like 3 or 4 different groups focused on cybersecurity, and they get together just for coffee chats to talk about different things. So that's a great way to meet other people and learn from other folks. A couple specific things. So the Center for Internet Security has a bunch of stuff on their website. And you can poke around on there. It's it's CIS, but cisecurity.org. And then also, so there's something called the Health Industry Cybersecurity Practices, and sort of along the lines of what Savita said around NIST. This is something that's out there, but it's meant to train. It's targeted towards the health industry, but honestly, most of this stuff is applicable regardless. It was a public-private partnership between some of like the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as some of the private sector industry to get together and to build these practices. So if you do a search for it, it's also on like the Health ISAC website, and I can share those links so we can have those sent out. But they go through and actually break down different practices about managing threats and protecting patients, and talk about it from the perspective of different size organizations as well. So what are the basics that a small organization should have in place versus a large organization. So that's a really great resource to take a look at. The other place that I would say is also just look at some of the security vendors, because a lot of them offer free training or they'll do different things, even if it's sort of slanted towards the tool that they have or they offer. They're still very knowledgeable about the things that are happening in that space, and it gets them exposure, but also helps train people up in whatever the slice of security that particular vendor focuses on. So I definitely recommend kind of poking around, particularly whatever topic you're interested in. Take a look and see what vendors are in that space, and then go and see what kinds of training materials they have available as well.
Look at the vendors and then see what type of training material they have available. That's a great advice. And in fact, we have a question from the audience, which is very, very relevant to what we are discussing right now. So the question is, how important are different cybersecurity certificates? Would you recommend some to keep updated with the latest issues in the field? Whoever would like to take that question.
I feel like we're all refusing to touch it. No. I would say, depending on where you want to work, and if you've had some skill set in the field. So if you're a networking engineer just switching over into cyber, it's a lot easier. I wouldn't necessarily say that the certifications are required. But if you're somebody coming from like psychology to cybersecurity, I would say, yes, you need the certifications. And that's really to get you established with some of the vocabulary and to show other employers that, hey, I'm investing in myself to make sure that I can make this transition. So essentially going to federal government, anything, including a national lab, they like to see certifications. In fact, federal government, depending on what organization you're going into, has requirements that you do have certifications at each level.
Yeah, I would totally agree with all of those points. One thing that I would say too is be specific, though, in what you choose, because I have seen, it can go the other direction of sometimes I've received a resume. It's a little thin on experience, but there are, 15 alphabet soup certification list after someone's name. And that worries me almost as much as no certification, that maybe this person's really good at taking tests, but doesn't necessarily have hands-on practical experience. So just chasing certificates or certifications is not the only answer. Definitely, focus on the ones that really represent what it is that or that you want to pursue.
Yeah, I agree with these points because the field of cybersecurity and privacy is very huge. There's so many aspects. Every aspect of software development deals with security. You can become network security expert, software security expert, cryptographer. They have some overlaps. You need to have a general knowledge for everything, but to dig into one of them. And if your passion is in computer network, go to get some certificate in network security and have some hands-on experience. Don't go and look at all of the different types of certificates and get certificate for every aspect of cybersecurity and think that you become expert with that. Pick what is your passion and try to learn as much as possible in that area.
Thank you for sharing that. So earlier we had a question looking back at the field that were some of the most important advancements in your opinion. So the other part of that question would be that how do we expect the cybersecurity landscape to evolve in, say, next decade? What are some of the things that you're excited about seeing or you hope that you will see in the next decade? Let's start with Sara.
Oh, gosh. So I think that one of the big places where I see things headed is user behavior analytics. Rather than having prescriptive security controls that are really bound within a box that expects a certain type of behavior, when you're able to compare behavioral patterns, that really opens up a lot of ability to detect a threat that you hadn't anticipated, right? So the more that you're able to put in things that can baseline and understand what normal behavior is, and then catch behavior that is anomalous to that, I think that really opens the door for better protections, because those threats are going to continue to advance, and it's almost it's an exciting and beautiful thing, right? The thought and the critical thinking that both sides of the house, not that I'm advocating for the adversary, but at the same time, people are very creative, right? And it's easier to be on the threat adversary side because you're not having to run the business and protect against every unknown thing coming at you, right? You're able to kind of poke around, find the holes, and exploit the weaknesses. So being able to have an approach that is more adaptable, but not only that, I think that the beauty of the behavioral analytics piece is that it also allows us to reduce the friction on the end user. So if you look at just user behavior authentication, right? Like being able to reduce the amount of authentication requirements for a legitimate user to be able to access the application or whatever it is that they're trying to access, right? But introduce friction for the adversary, that's a win-win, right? You're helping enable the business at the same time that you're making it more complex for the threat actors. So I really see that as kind of what's on the near-term horizon of how we're starting to shift and pivot to a different type of security control to face that ever-evolving threat.
Thank you for sharing that. I like how you phrased it, that it's a win-win on both sides. You're making it easier for some and then adding friction for the other party. Nice. Sapita?
So I go with something simpler, and that's basically, in recent years, we are collecting lots of information, and I think that one of the parts that cybersecurity and privacy is going to make people more aware of their personal information and also make companies protecting their personal information. So the field, I think, it goes towards usable privacy and privacy engineering. I don't say that security is not going to advance, but from that point of view, we are seeing lots of notions of privacy by design and bringing privacy from early on in software engineering. And this part, because of all the connected devices that we have, and we are getting more and more IoT devices that's all connected, or we will have autonomous vehicle that they will collect lots of information. This part of the field will also advance quite a lot, especially in terms of federated learning, differential privacy, and how to do research or how to get some knowledge about personal information without that information leaves the devices themselves. And so those are the things that I think that become way more prevalent as part of the cybersecurity and privacy practices in companies.
Most helpful. Simone, your thoughts on the future?
I expect the cybersecurity landscape to become more ubiquitous in the sense that people are realizing cybersecurity needs to be implemented, and it needs to be implemented by design from the beginning. And so I expect the software development model to change. Currently, the model has a separation of duties, and we saw some evidence with this issue when cloud computing started to boom. Traditionally, you had your network engineer, you had your web server admin, you had your software developer, you had your testers. They were all separate people, duties were separated. When cloud came about, now you had everything in one. And companies were going to their software developers saying, hey, put this in the cloud. And they're like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. So they would go to Stack Overflow and see how to make something in the cloud, and boom, they made it work. Unfortunately, that excluded your network engineer, your cybersecurity people, your web server admin. All those people were excluded. So you essentially we're asking for everybody in one. And that led to a series of security breaches and billions of dollars lost. So now with 5G coming aboard, you're going to add another complexity layer to that. And that's where it becomes ubiquitous and it's everywhere. So that's going to force a design change in the way that we do software development and hardware development.
Yeah, design change in both software and hardware development. Beautifully put, and I can't agree more. We'll take one more question, but before that, a request to our audience. On your screen, you will see a link to a brief feedback form. It will take just 2 minutes or less, but if you can fill that out, that will give me some signal on what type of questions you enjoyed, what type of questions you would see more being asked, and what type of fields or areas would you like to see covered in this ongoing series by ACM-W. And while our audience fills the form, one final question for all three of you. What advice would you give to someone who is considering a career in cybersecurity? We can go in the reverse order, starting with Simone.
My advice would be to invest in yourself. You do that anyway when you go get a college degree. Your employer most likely did not pay for you ahead of time to go get that degree. So you are investing in yourself. Continue to do that for the rest of your life, and always understand that learning is continuous. Things change, especially in cybersecurity, they change very quickly. So investing in yourself regularly is key to staying current in the field.
Invest continuously.
I add to it that invest continuously and learn continuously. And if you are interested in cybersecurity, also learn the application very well. If you want to do software security, be a good programmer and try to do as much coding as possible to learn that where are the flaws, where are the vulnerabilities. Do some, for example, bug hunting programs. Try to see that if you can find any vulnerabilities. Learn about get certificates that are needed for the parts that you are interested. As Simone said, the field is moving so fast, it's changing so fast. So be up to date, do hands-on experience, and learn continuously, please.
Thank you for sharing that. Sara, your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually love both what Savita and Simone said. And there's a great quote that I came across that I love by Alvin Toffler that says, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And I love that because I think that's spot on, right? And it goes for also, even when you think you know a specific discipline, again, going back to listening to the business. So definitely, investing in yourself, believing in yourself, and then finding the things that you're good at, right? And amplify the things you are good at. Don't always just look at the gaps, at the things that you aren't. You can always partner with other people to compensate for the areas where you aren't strong, but invest in yourself and the things you're naturally good at, and that will help you just propel yourself forward.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I was also reading somewhere that we put so much emphasis on finding out the things that we are not good at, that we completely forget to nurture the things that we are good at. That might be equally beneficial, if not more. Thank you so much, Sara, Savita, Simone, for this wonderful advice and discussion. I'm sure it's very, very useful to our audience. And this session, of course, will be available on demand for other people as well. I personally learned a lot about the field and the various nuances, and I'm really, really grateful for your time. Thank you, everyone in the audience who joined us. Please do fill out that form to give me some ideas of how to format and schedule the next session. And we'll see you at the next session of ACM-W Celebrating Technology Leaders. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.